I have opened this file 3 times in my career. I do not want to open it a fourth. The classification halls of Vethrani Prime are old, older than most species currently drawing breath in this galaxy. The vaulted stone of the inner archive chambers was quarried before the Drevery had yet developed language, before the Kassari hegemony had reached the orbital threshold, before the Pact of 17 Names was written into the Galactic Compact. I have spent 41 years walking these halls, cataloging the extinct and the vanished, organizing the sealed records of species that made decisions from which no record keeper could recover. 41 years. And in all that time, the Drevery classification file has spent most of it behind a lock that requires 2 senior archivists and a council key to open. The file is not large. That is the first thing a visitor notices, if a visitor were ever permitted, which they are not. For the magnitude of what is contained within it, the physical record is thin. A few dozen data slates in their original casings. A handful of telemetry transcripts, most of them cut short mid-sentence. 1 survival capsule log, 14 seconds long, which I will not summarize, and which no archivist who has heard it has ever elected to describe to a junior colleague. And at the front of the file, before any of the Drevery's own records, placed there by the Classification Council at the time of the species' final designation, a single copied fragment. The fragment predates the file. It was recovered from the Elder Warning registers of the Orith succession, a species older than the Drevery by several thousand years and wiser by precisely the margin that allowed them to survive. The Orith had encountered human space twice in their long history. They had not entered it either time. The Elder Warning they left in the Galactic Compact registers is brief, and it is the first thing any archivist reads when this file is opened. It reads as follows. Do not enter the hunt zone. Humans hunt back. 8 words. The Orith Elder who inscribed them had, by their species' reckoning, earned the right to say more. They chose not to. I have come to believe that brevity was not economy. It was the only honest response to something that resisted longer description. The Drevery were hunters. I use that word without the flourish it sometimes carries in lesser records. They were not hunters in the metaphorical sense, not a warrior culture that employed hunting as symbol or ritual. They were hunters by biology, by neurological architecture, by the deepest structure of their civilization. For 12,000 years before they achieved spaceflight, the Drevery organized their entire social hierarchy around the designation of prey. Their castes were determined by what they had hunted and what had not yet been hunted. Their highest honor was to designate a new category, a creature, a species, a civilization, and to be the first of your kind to take from it. When they reached the stars, they brought this architecture with them. For the first 600 years of Drevery spaceflight, the Galactic Compact regarded them as a nuisance. They were methodical and patient, and they had no interest in territory for its own sake. They moved through space the way their ancestors had moved through the deep forests of their home continent, quietly, purposefully designating and cataloging and eventually pursuing. Several compact species filed formal grievances. 2 smaller civilizations that had not yet achieved political standing in the compact simply disappeared from the records during Drevery expansion periods, and the evidence was never substantial enough for a formal inquiry. The Drevery, for their part, regarded the compact's displeasure with the serenity of an apex species that has never genuinely feared anything. This is the detail I return to every time I open this file. The serenity. They were not arrogant in the way that smaller species are arrogant, brittle, defensive, loud about their own importance. The Drevery were simply certain. Certainty that deep and that old does not announce itself. It simply is. When their deep-range cartographers first brought them the maps of the galactic mid-arm and noted the sectors that the compact's charts marked as restricted, the designation that every compact cartographer uses for human space, that no compact species discusses openly. The Drevery Council did not convene a debate. They studied the records. They noted that a significant number of species in the compact's history had approached the restricted sectors and not returned. They noted the Orith Warning. They noted the formal compact prohibition. And then they classified humans as the highest designation their system allowed. Not as a threat, not as a peer, as a category of prey that had not yet been formally claimed. I have spent considerable time across my career trying to understand how a species that had survived 12,000 years of evolution could make that particular error. I have concluded that it was not, technically, an error of intelligence. The Drevri were intelligent. Their tactical planning was sophisticated. Their patience was extraordinary. The error was structural. A civilization built entirely around the category of predator cannot, at its foundations, process the possibility that what it has designated as prey might be looking back. They sent the first designation fleet into human space with full ceremony. By their reckoning, it was the most significant moment in their civilization's history. The opening of a new category, the highest hunt, the act that would define the Drevri's place at the apex of galactic life for the next 1,000 years. I have the fleet's departure telemetry. I have the ceremonial addresses their fleet designators gave before leaving. I have the first several hours of standard navigational transmissions as they crossed the compact border and moved into the restricted sectors. Then the transmissions stop. Not all at once. That is the detail I find most difficult to set down in plain language. Not all at once. The outer vessels went first, their signals cutting off in the space of a few minutes. The inner fleet continued transmitting for a while longer, though the content of those transmissions shifted in character so completely that the compact receiving station on the border initially assumed there had been some form of equipment malfunction. There was no malfunction. What the operators were hearing was simply not what they had expected to hear from the Drevri. The first designation fleet had been the most composed, the most certain, the most prepared force their civilization had ever assembled. What came through in those final transmissions was none of those things. The last coherent signal came from the fleet designator's own vessel, and it lasted 11 seconds. I'm not going to reproduce what was said. I will note that it contained no tactical information, no orders, no requests for reinforcement. It contained only the fleet designator's voice. And then it stopped. The compact border station logged the cessation time and filed an incident report. They sent a query into the restricted sectors, as protocol required. No response came back. No Drevri ship came back. No debris field was detected at the border, which means, for those who understand what that means, that nothing drifted out. The Drevri sent 3 more fleets in the following decade. I will not go through each one in detail. The records are brief for the same reason the first fleet's records are brief. What I will note is that after the 4th fleet, the Drevri Council went silent. Not diplomatically silent, the kind of silent that a species goes when its foundational architecture has encountered something it cannot categorize and is not equipped to survive categorizing. They never sent a 5th fleet. They also never, in the years that followed, discussed what had happened. Not in any record we have recovered. Not in diplomatic channels. Not in internal transmissions. Not in anything their civilization produced in the roughly 200 years between the cessation of the 4th Fleet and the Drevri's final designation in our records. A civilization of hunters who had spent 12,000 years building an identity around the designation of prey encountered something in human space and could not speak of it afterward. What killed them in the end was not human space. The compact record on that point is clear. By the time the Drevri collapsed, they had not sent another vessel anywhere near the restricted sectors. What killed them was what the encounter had done to their architecture. A civilization organized entirely around the certainty of being apex cannot survive the discovery that the category does not apply. It does not fall apart loudly. It simply stops working, slowly, quietly, the way a machine stops when the premise that powers it is removed. The last Drevri transmission in the Galactic Compact record is administrative. A resource requisition, filed routinely, acknowledged by Compact Station, never followed up on. That is how their record ends. Not with a final battle, not with a declaration, not with anything that would make a satisfying close to a 12,000-year civilization. Just a requisition form that no one ever came to collect. I resealed the file after my 4th review. Both senior archivists countersigned. The council key was returned to its housing. A junior archivist who had been assisting with the outer records asked me, afterward, what the file contained. She had been with the classification halls for 3 years and had not yet worked a sealed extinction case. Her question was earnest. She was not asking for the Drevery story. She was asking what it felt like to hold it. I thought about the Orith elder who had written 8 words when they could have written 800. I thought about the fleet designator's 11-second transmission and what it told you about the distance between expectation and reality. I thought about the compact's restricted sector designations and the cartographers who maintain them without ever being asked to explain them in full. I told her that some files are sealed because the knowledge inside them is dangerous. And some files are sealed because the knowledge inside them is simply too heavy to carry in the open, and the kindest thing you can do for the species who will come after you is to leave them the warning without the weight. She asked what the warning was. I told her, do not designate what is not consented to be designated. She wrote it down. She will probably not understand it fully for some time. That is, I have come to believe, exactly as it should be,